We're going to be talking today about the Alberta tailings ponds, and the reason for that is because a division, I think it's a division of the NAFTA agreement, it's called the Secretariat of the Commission of Environmental Cooperation, and they released the Alberta Tailings Pond 2 Factual Record. And I don't know what that is, but Dale Marshall from the Natural Environmental Defense Fund is going to explain it to us. So welcome to the interview, Dale.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Please, in simple language and not too long, explain what this is.
Yeah, so the Commission for Environmental Cooperation is often called the environmental arm of the NAFTA, of the North American Free Trade Agreement. So it's made up of the three countries, Canada, US, and Mexico. And its role is to investigate when citizens bring complaints to the CEC. It investigates whether one of the countries is not enforcing its environmental laws. So in this case, we brought a case to the Commission for Environmental Cooperation saying essentially that Canada was not enforcing the Fisheries Act when it came to chemicals, toxic chemicals that were leaching into the Athabasca River from tailings ponds.
Now, I've scanned the document and it's fairly technical from my point of view, and I'm sure from my viewers' point of view, but can you give us a brief description of what the record says?
Yeah, we were really happy with the factual record that came out because it showed, it validated what we had put forward. Essentially, the arguments that we had made in our submission were repeated back to us, and they go as such. First of all, records from both monitoring as well as company records themselves, like Syncrude, show that the chemicals from tailings ponds are ending up in the groundwater, that there are elevated concentrations of these chemicals that are also found in the tributaries of the Athabasca River. And in the Athabasca River, the chemicals that have been found there basically have the same chemical fingerprint as chemicals that are found in tailings ponds. So and they do that in order to differentiate between natural bitumen that's found in soil in northern Alberta, of course, and tailings ponds water. And this was research that was published in an academic peer-reviewed journal back in 2009, actually with Environment and Climate Change Canada scientists as the main scientists. And essentially, so all of this evidence clearly shows that chemicals are making their way into groundwater, into the tributary, and into the main stem of the Athabasca River, which is what we had claimed in our case.
Let me play devil's advocate here for just a moment, because supporters of the industry will say that, look, this is a big industrial operation, it has enormous economic benefits, and some impact on the local environment is inevitable. There's no way to stop it. You can minimize it, you can't stop it. Does that hold up based on the data that was released in these documents?
Well, it doesn't. I mean, the reason we have environmental laws is to protect the environment. And the Fisheries Act is really clear that if you put, and the Act says deleterious substances, so a harmful chemical of some kind, if that gets placed into fish-bearing water, so water that has some kind of fish or other aquatic organism, that is a violation of the Fisheries Act. And it's, of course, there to protect rivers and the ecosystems that are found within it. So this was a clear violation of the Fisheries Act from our point of view. And this was, in our estimation, confirmed by the CEC.
Last question, and it's a bit complicated, Dale, but I have interviewed other environmental law professors. Martin Olazinski from the University of Calgary comes to mind, and they make a very important distinction here. They say, yes, Alberta has very robust environmental laws and regulations on its books that apply to the oil sands. How they're applied is a whole nother question. Mm-hmm. It's a very good, important distinction. And they're not applied all that well. So if the Alberta, the regulators say captured as they claim, and the government's not going to, enforce the regulations it has, is there an argument here for the Canadian government to step in and enforce federal regulations?
Yeah, well, in this case, this was another finding from the Factual record that just came out from the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. It showed that there was no administrative agreement between Alberta and the federal government. And what that means is that power has not been devolved to the province. And so both jurisdictions are responsible for this contamination. Both the Alberta environment laws apply, and so do the federal laws, in this case, the Federal Fisheries Act. And so our case focused on the federal government, and clearly this was a violation of the Fisheries Act federally. You can also argue that there are violations of the Alberta environmental laws. But it's federally, it's very similar to the situation that Martin Olszynski and you just described, which is we have better laws than are being applied when it comes to the environmental protection at the federal level. Often we have better laws that are not sufficiently enforced. And one of the other findings very quickly was that essentially the federal government for a number of years basically just stopped even monitoring, and basically would just go on sites when there were complaints.
Okay, this will be the last question. So if that's the case, then what does your organization recommend that the governments do, but in particular, the federal government?
Yeah, I mean, two things. First of all, they need to bring charges against those polluters, and Syncrude and Suncor in particular were identified in the Factual record, further violations of the Fisheries Act for depositing chemicals into fish-bearing waters. I mean, this is a really important issue, especially for First Nations that are living downstream from these areas and that are being put at risk, both in terms of the water they use and the ecosystems they depend upon. Secondly, they need to come up with a way of treating these long-term, because right now the plan between the Alberta government and the federal government is to treat this water and then slowly release it into the Athabasca River. This is a plan that is being supported by the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, but not by the keepers of the Athabasca. So that tells you a little bit what positions the governments are taking. We need a real plan that is about full containment of these chemicals to make sure that they don't continue to leach or be actually purposely put into the Athabasca River and risk people downstream. And you know what we are environmental defense is actually, you know, considering whether we might bring a lawsuit with respect to this against the federal government, saying they have not sufficiently enforced the Fisheries Act. And we have done that in other examples of polluters who were not prosecuted when evidence was there.
Dale, thank you very much for this. This is it's an issue we haven't talked about much publicly for a long time, but in my opinion, it needs to be put back on the public agenda in a big way. And I have no doubt that we'll be talking to you again in the future about this issue.
It was my pleasure, Markham. Thanks for your interest.